Bend Around the Wind by Skylia. Chapter 97. The Banquet. Part 1. When Loki first woke up back on board of the Aurelian, at first he just kept staring up at the ceiling with a confused frown on his face, and Tony feared that whatever Hatchet had done was not enough. And it hurt just to think about Loki not remembering their past. He felt selfish, so incredibly selfish, because there were a lot of horrible memories Loki would be better off without, and once he remembered Tony, he would remember everything else too. But still, he wanted nothing more but to see recognition in his eyes. And then Loki turned his head and noticed him. Within a blink, Tony was held in a bone-crushing embrace. "You're alive!" Loki had said, his voice full of relief. He sounded like he was barely able to believe it. Yeah, that broke Tony's heart all over again. He had known in that very moment that it would take a long time until they were all able to move on from this. He would also never forget the look on Loki's face when he noticed everyone else around them, Hatchet and Thor hovering by his bed, Brody and Bruce standing beside Tony, while Cap and Bucky just a few steps away. It was hard to make Loki speechless, but he was without a doubt shocked to see the extent of his rescue party. Tony did his best to hide the sadness he felt at seeing Loki's disbelief. Loki then immediately asked about Bee, Juyu, and Drongo since he could not see them anywhere. He expected the worst, of course, so Tony was all too happy to inform him about what really happened. During those few days they were coming home, no, not just those few days, even still, Tony was a little overwhelmed with the need to help Loki or take care of him. But of course there was a limit how much Loki was willing to accept from him, and Tony understood that. He really did. Loki had his own way of dealing with stuff, and it involved very little patience for affectionate gestures. Sure, he took comfort in touch and enjoyed using sex as distraction and stress relief, but generally he liked to sort himself out in a more methodical and clinical way. So, yeah, Tony got all that, so he was willing to accept Loki's smiles as genuine, and he did not push him too much when he was clearly unwilling to listen. But it was still frustrating! At least Hatchet seemed to share both his concern and annoyance. Not that either of them wanted to demand more from Loki than he was ready to give, and that was rightly so. It would be fine. In time. That was also the reason why Tony agreed when out of the blue, Loki announced that it was time to move forward with his plans. He didn't argue at all, really. If Loki wanted to jump head first into interstellar diplomacy to take his mind off of things, then so be it. To be honest, he was eager to have this problem gone too. He didn't expect it to turn into such a spectacle, but it was the two of them, so of course they turned it into a flashy party the whole world had its eyes on. So after tonight, we're either going to celebrate or die a horrible death. Not like you to speak in extremes this much, Loki huffed. Tony turned to look at him and saw that despite his words, Loki was tense. He reached out and stroked Loki's bare arm with the back of his hand. "It will be perfect," Tony told him. "I mean, you and Pepper. Wow, I mean, that's like world domination right there. You could probably have a posh brunch, get on with the conquering, and be done with it before tea time." Loki chuckled and leaned into his touch, finally looking back at him. "Well, it is good, I suppose, that neither of us have much interest in ruling this realm. At the moment." "That's hilarious. I am so gonna monitor you two." "Stop it!" Loki chastised. Tony gave him a shit-eating grin and leaned closer for a short kiss. "I love the outfit, by the way," Tony said after they parted. Black and gold. That was Loki's color scheme, and it went well with Tony's crimson and gold suit. The leather pants and the new long boots with a 3-inch heels, damn it, were the usual for Loki. But this sort of gold embroidered fitted vest, that was something new. It showed off a lot of skin. Normally, the only times Tony saw his arms bare were when he was naked, since he almost always preferred shirts or long-sleeve t-shirts. Tony would have loved him to be a skin-tight t-shirt kind of guy because his upper body was to die for, but Loki had his own preferences. So this outfit, all the leather and the v-neck, yeah, seriously drool-worthy. Loki also had a long black sleeveless coat with him that was currently folded up on the chair next to him. Tony was pretty sure that his pants were going to get too tight if he spent too much time looking at him tonight. Not to mention the hair. It was nothing like the simple braid Loki usually preferred. There was a long braid, and then there were small braids, and of course all those gemstones in it. And still, Loki could pull it off and be his gracefully masculine self. It was a freaking superpower. New style, Tony remarked when Loki stayed silent. It's... You know why. You don't have to do that, Tony told him. I'm all for it, whatever you want. Just, no pressure. A lot of pressure, Stark. It's necessary for many reasons. Besides, it's time I stopped being childish. Ain't nothing childish about it, Tony said, leaning closer until their shoulders touched. Loki smiled a little, then allowed his pale skin to be washed away by blue. Tony found himself adoring the color the more he saw it. He suddenly had the urge to find as many sapphires as he could with the exact same shade as Loki's skin. Those would look even better in his hair than the red and yellow ones he wore now. Tony leaned in for another kiss. He was also growing fond of the slightly cooler lips. Time for me to do my press round, Tony said with a sigh as he pulled away. You and Hatchet can start on the portal. I'll be with you in front of the press, Loki declared. He picked up his sleeveless coat as he stood up and put it on. Now that his skin was blue, Tony could appreciate his clothes even more. It looks unwrapped and gorgeous, but he really shouldn't be distracted by that right now. What do you mean, with me? He asked. Loki smiled widely and mischievously. I do not plan to hide on this realm, he said. You live your life in the spotlight, so it's inevitable for me to be seen. I would rather decide for myself when and how to step out from the shadows. And you plan to do that like this? Tony asked. Just to make sure. New style, Loki said simply. Oh, Pepper's gonna kill me, Tony said as he hurried after him. You are both out of your minds, were Pepper's first words to them, unsurprisingly. Even her lips were frowning. That always made Tony feel bad. I would say it's all Loki's fault, but I totally enjoyed it, Tony shrugged, not being able to wipe the grin off his face. That little lip lock is going to be on the front pages. Everywhere! She exclaimed. And it will be glorious! Hatchet interrupted her as he walked up the stairs. We had a plan, Pepper continued as she walked closer to the two of them, completely ignoring Hatchet's existence. And the closer she got, the more obvious it became that she was talking more to Loki than to Tony. The plan involved a gentle introduction, dropping some hints before making it official. Not this! I thought we had a plan. It's not so bad, Pepper, Tony tried. It's good publicity. You are an enabler, Pepper shot him down. And you! She turned to Loki again. You're just as bad. No, you're worse. You actually made me believe that you were not going to be reckless. I really believed that. What was I thinking? Fret not, Lady Pepper. The masses love having something juicy to chew on. Now they have less time to pay attention to more serious matters. Pepper crossed her arms over her chest. If it were Tony, he would be apologizing already, but Loki was Loki, and he did not back down. Finally, Pepper took a deep breath and visibly calmed herself. Well, this better be the last surprise you have for me, she said. I have planned nothing more. You have my word. Loki smiled serenely and bowed his head a little. Pepper seemed to be placated for the moment. Rhodey's here, she said then, and the Avengers are supposed to arrive any minute now. Well, let's get this show on the road then. Tony clapped his hands. He was giddy and excited, a little nervous. Nothing to worry about. He was still all riding on the buzz he got. when Loki grabbed him for a kiss in front of all those cameras. He really couldn't wait to see that back on TV. It's been too long since he had any good fun with the media. Oh, he could picture Fury with that throbbing vein on his forehead pretty clearly. You should go and greet your guests, Loki told him. Hatchet and I need to start building the portal. After you've said hello, join us there to greet the arriving guests. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Tony smiled at him. He thought about kissing Loki's cheek, but he was so tall in his new boots. So he kissed his hand instead. Loki's eyes twinkled in amusement, and Hatchet was smirking too. Bastards, both of them. Tony decided not to give them more fodder and did not say anything. Pepper looked impatient anyway, so Tony hurried over to her to get going. Hatchet and Loki took off in the opposite direction. Wow, the Avengers clearly had no problem with claiming their tables. They were not the sort of group that would wait around awkwardly for the host. Two ironettes in lovely evening gowns were already standing by their tables, and the waiters were taking drink orders. Tony was not sure if it was Pepper or Loki in the end who decided where to seat them all, but it was obviously well planned. Brody, Steve, Bucky, and T'Challa were sitting by the table the president was going to be at, while the table next to them was occupied by Bruce, Janet, and Hank. Thor was going to arrive later, straight from Asgard, so he was of course not there just yet. What's this? None of the S.H.I.E.L.D. division thought this was a good enough party to attend? Tony asked as he walked up to them. He distinctly remembered having at least Clint and Coulson on the guest list. You honestly expected them to come? Brody asked, and of course he wore his mess uniform, and so did Steve. They still might, Bucky said. He went for a suit. I have this feeling they're going to show up later. Oh good, that's what I need, Pepper said. Guests arriving out of order. I really wouldn't worry about their subtlety, T'Challa said, which of course reminded Tony that he was supposed to be here to greet his guests, so he strode up to that table and held out a hand. So we finally meet in person, he said. T'Challa stood up. He was wearing something that was most likely traditional wear from his home country. Red and silver, well, not silver, those bands and little clasps had to be made from vibranium, obviously. Also, Tony could confidently say that he spent enough time around royalties at this point to recognize the way he was looked at. He was being sized up and judged. The king shook his hand firmly, which of course made Tony smile. I wasn't sure if I should go for the Your Highness thing or not. I'm not deliberately being insulting, as hard as it might be to believe that. T'Challa's lips curled up into an amused smile. I believe I wouldn't be terribly upset, he replied, and from what I heard about your guest list, I will be just one of many. Oh yeah, this is like the party of the decade, Janet spoke up, already sipping a glass of champagne. You wouldn't believe how many politicians and celebrities were willing to do almost anything to get invited. Oh, you know just what I'd like to hear. Tony smiled over at her, then he turned back to T'Challa. And we definitely need to chat more, but later. I have a portal opening in a couple of minutes, and I have a prince with very little patience expecting me to welcome guests with him. Yes, I wonder what you could possibly want to talk to me about. T'Challa said, yeah, it did not take a genius, even though the guy was one, to figure out what Tony might want from the king who owned almost every ounce of vibranium on the planet. So Tony just smiled back at him and did not say a word. He circled to the other table. Janet, I know I promised to have time for more than just a few words. Oh, give me a break. Go schmooze with your important guests. You don't need to sweet talk us. We're just here to drink your expensive drinks, eat your expensive food, and give you good press. Tony smiled widely as she raised her glass. You're officially invited to all my parties. You already invited me to all your parties back on my 20th birthday on Malta, she said. I have literally no memory of that party. Yeah, I wonder why. Brody mumbled into his glass, which made almost all of them laugh. Okay, we can go down memory lane later. I gotta run. Enjoy the party. You should wait for the Elven wine before you really start drinking, though. And just to throw this out here, thank you for coming. I feel genuinely appreciated, Bruce said quietly, which caused another round of laughter. Tony walked away from the tables with a smile, not paying attention to the conversations that resumed. ETA on the president? He asked Pepper. She should arrive after all our off-planet guests are here, but she's known to arrive too early sometimes. If she does arrive early, I'll greet her and send someone to get you from the portal. And this is why you're irreplaceable. Tony smiled. Where's Abby? Checking in with security. You know how he is. Pepper smiled. I have never felt safer. Tony told her and leaned in to kiss her cheek, making her smile again. Go before Loki loses his patience, Pepper suggested. He's in a surprisingly good mood. Tony said thoughtfully, I think he enjoys this. Oh, yes, he does. Pepper agreed immediately. Tony smiled, squeezed her arm, and took off again. He had a feeling that he was going to spend his entire evening just like this. It was pretty different from the way he used to spend his parties. I'm not late. I know I'm not late, Tony said hurriedly. He shouldn't have bothered because neither Loki nor Hatchet were paying attention to him. They stood facing the wall where runes burned with a golden-green glow. They did not acknowledge Tony, so he shut up and let them focus. He knew from the way dimensional travel worked with magic that this was not an easy thing to accomplish. Loki told him that if they were anywhere else but on Earth, the very gate between the two universes, where they could channel the power or the Yggdrasil and use the raw force of the power cosmic, they wouldn't be able to create the store and control it the way they wanted to. Tony was first not sure why they couldn't just get everyone who was within the 9 realms with the Bifrost if it was this hard to do this, but then he got it. Loki wanted to do this because it was difficult, because it was a feat very few would be able to accomplish. He was showing off, but not just to feed his own ego. No, this was showing off his power for very specific reasons. He made a statement. The message would be clear to all. This is who I am, and this is what I am capable of. Loki and Hatchet moved in sync, and it was honestly incredible to watch them. They turned their palms and drew a half circle in the air, magic lighting up at the tips of their fingers. The runes burned even brighter for a moment, then swirling beams of light appeared between the symbols. Bright gold and poison green, and growing into a circle, a gateway. It took but a few moments before the light dimmed, but the disc remained. It looked like liquid light sticking to the wall between the runes. Wow. That looks awesome, he couldn't help but say. Loki and Hatchet took a step back and observed their creation. It'll do, Loki nodded. Random a little something most magic wielders would just dream about creating. Hatchet scoffed, but there was humor in his eyes. Nah, it's good. You gotta play it cool, Tony said. Nobody with even a speck of knowledge in magic is going to think that it was a common achievement for us, Loki said. So where does this one come from? Tony asked. The look on Loki's face answered the question right away, and Tony immediately felt his heart beat faster. Sakaar, Loki said. They did get that message that you did, right? Tony asked when nothing happened for a few seconds. The surface of the portal rippled and shifted then. There was a blur of dark green and Juyu stepped out. Or ran through, really, because she was suddenly there, looking around, spotting them almost immediately, and running again. Tony did not see who was following her next because he had his arms full in a blink. Him and Loki squashed together because, of course, she grabbed both of them at the same time. Crap, honestly, she started saying right away. I had like a million scenarios in my head of things going wrong, and we're not being there to help. Bless her heart. We're all fine, Tony told her, rubbing her back before pulling away. She grinned at him, then turned to look at Loki. If she was surprised about seeing him in his Jotun shape, she did not show it. We would have stayed, but Loki cut her off by shaking his head and putting a hand on her cheek. You went where you were needed the most, he told her, and that is right so. Tony looked over to the portal. Bee and Drongo stood just outside of it, Hatchet in front of them. No Kara, though, which was a shame. Drongo clasped the grinning Hatchet on the shoulder after they spoke to one another for a few moments. Then they all walked closer. Good to see you back on your feet, big guy. Tony grinned. Drongo smiled in return and rested his head on Tony's shoulder, squeezing it a little. It is good to see you again as well, my friend, he said. Loki, I'm very glad you are well. He only noticed that Bee was a bit wrapped around Loki's middle when he turned to look at him. She had both of her arms around his waist, her head resting on his chest. Loki was stroking her long black hair. I can thank you all for that, Loki said. You did not need much saving, Bee said quietly, still not letting go. Loki smiled down at her. Not from the other, no, Loki said quietly, but I need not explain that to you. She sighed and lifted her hand to grab hold of the one Loki had in her hair. She squeezed his blue fingers, holding on for a few moments, then let go of him and stepped back. She did not say anything, but the two of them always had their ways to understand one another without needing words. They only shared a look this time around, too.
"So, Kara?"
Tony asked.
"Her duties did not allow her to join us, unfortunately," Drongo told him. "But she sends regards and wanted me to assure you that the friendship and alliance between you and our people remains strong, and that she hopes that in the future this friendship will continue to grow and flourish."
That was definitely good to hear. Kara was definitely someone you wanted to stay friends with.
So what exactly is happening here? Jiyu asked. I mean, sure, we knew when and how we were going to get back here, but we really did not get details. And by the way, that my message thing? Super disturbing.
Sadly, there are not many other ways to communicate between the 9 realms and a place as far as Sakar, Hadget said.
"What matters is that it worked,"
Tony said.
"and I can explain what exactly is going on while Loki and Hadget get back to redirect the portal. We're expecting many guests." "You definitely piqued my interest,"
Drongo said. Oh, he had no idea. Drongo, B, and Jiyu did not stay with them by the portal. They had their own table waiting for them, where they could pass the time until Tony, Loki, and Hadget were done with welcoming the guests. Tony did not really understand how the reshaping of the portal worked, but he was still really fascinated when the runes started glowing again. Some of them dimmed or darkened completely, while others lit up. He did not want to call it dialing, but he was pretty sure that the logic was the same. The runes were what directed the gateway, while Loki and Hadget were the ones who powered it, or at least that was Tony's guess. Alfheim was next, the elven lords and ladies that Frey chose to attend, and of course Frey himself and his +1, who was the reason this whole banquet was arranged in the first place. Sure, it was great to build some solid diplomatic connection with the elves, but their tentative alliance would matter very little as long as Loki was still wanted for his crimes in Asgard. They wanted to get on the good side of the elf lords and ladies, sure, but Gerd, she was probably their only hope to placate Jotunheim in a way that did not involve Loki's death. They needed her support if they wanted Loki to get out of this in one piece. The thought of her having this much power over Loki's fate did not sit well with Tony. Sure, Loki told him that Frey assured him that she had plenty of reasons to help him, but Tony did not know her and Loki never met her. They had nothing but Frey's word on the matter. Loki seemed to trust his uncle, but Tony was still uneasy. When the portal stabilized, then rippled, the elves came through first. Tony remembered every important name. 3 elven lords and 3 ladies were chosen by Frey to attend, and of course they all brought their significant others, 1 or 2 adult children, and maybe 1 or 2 other elves who were probably warriors, mages, or advisors. So yeah, that meant that every single one of them had an entourage of 5 or 6 elves with them. And they really did bring wine. All of them! Tony knew how to do this. He was not at all intimidated. He smiled, he bowed, he charmed, made a few of them laugh. He was good. He was on fire tonight and totally nailing the first impression thing. Loki was, of course, his incredibly suave and delightful self as well. He's been doing this for centuries, and he knew most of these elves personally. What surprised Tony was that none of the elves seemed to bat an eye at Loki's appearance. They definitely got the memo about Loki's true heritage. There was no shock, no disgust, nor any prodding questions. He did not know whether all elves would be like this, or if it was why Frey chose these lords and ladies to attend. Maybe there would be questions later in the evening, but for now, Tony was A-okay with these guys. No matter how good an actor Loki was, Tony could see some tension in his shoulders when the first elves stepped through the portal. But now he was gradually relaxing the more he was treated normally. Some elves complimented his talent in magic. Others commented on his exotic hairstyle that was sure to be popular in Alfheim after tonight. Others confessed their excitement about visiting Midgard for the first time and meeting immortals, which was, of course, always Tony's cue to drop in lines like, "Hey, Tony Stark, Midgardian immortal, I'm thrilled to be met." The last lord to walk through was the ambassador of the Kaldafar. Tony couldn't help but stare for a moment or two because they looked quite different from all their Ljosafar kin. Their skin was a very similar shade of blue to Loki's, but smooth, no ridges or markings like the ones decorating Loki's body. Their eyes were dark navy blue, so that was of course different too. Their hair seemed to be black at first glance, but whenever the light shone at the right angle, Tony could see that it was blue as well. They wore their hair in small braids, mostly, almost like dreadlocks. Now that Tony saw them, he knew where Hatchet took the inspiration for Loki's hairstyle. The Lord of the Ice Elves, Lord Marvar, walked up to them. Right next to him, an elven lady. Loki was looking at her with a little frown, the one that meant that he was thinking about something. When they were close enough, the lady smiled, wide and bright. "Oh, Lady Elfane," Loki said suddenly. "How good it is to see you again."
"Prince Loki, the pleasure is all mine. It's been long my hope to be able to speak with you again."
She stepped closer to greet Loki. Tony saw a few versions of the same greeting now, but this was definitely the friendliest one out of all. Loki told him days ago not to expect to be greeted in the same manner as Loki because he was neither royalty nor someone the elves personally knew. The next time he met all these elves, he would get a traditional greeting. But he was a stranger for now. "Lord Marvar," Loki turned to the Kaldafar man. He was greeted by him in the same manner than by the elven lady, hands clasped, foreheads almost touching. "Welcome to Midgard. We are grateful that you have accepted our invitation. Allow me to introduce you to your host, Master Stark, my beloved." Tony bowed, just as he knew he was supposed to, and smiled charmingly. "I'm very pleased to meet you," he said.
"And I am as well,"
Marvar said.
"Your reputation precedes you. We have already heard much about you in court."
"And you still decided to come. That's fortunate," he joked, and felt pretty good when both Marvar and the Lady Elfane laughed.
"I would have come even if all elves had said no,"
the man said, and turned back to look at Loki.
"and not just because you are the reason my daughter is still among us today."
He wrapped an arm around the lady's, his daughter's shoulder, and the gratefulness in his voice was definitely genuine.
"Centuries passed, and I had not the opportunity to thank you in person for what you had done."
"I'm just glad my skills were fine enough to be able to be of help," Loki answered smoothly.
"I know you are not a humble man, Prince Loki,"
Marvar said with a hint of amusement.
"You need not try so hard to befriend me. My family is in your debt."
Loki bowed his head a little in acknowledgement. Marvar continued.
"Furthermore, the Kaldafar had a long history of mutually beneficial alliance with Jotnar before the war," he said. "That friendship is now lost. The trading routes, everything. But knowing what I know and looking at you, well, for the first time in long years, I believe true peace is within reach again."
"I cannot make any oaths or promises," Loki said.
"That I know well,"
Marvar answered.
"But with Lord Frey's plans of marriage and now you, I trust we have a brighter future ahead of us. Peace with Jotunheim would be incredibly valuable to the Kaldafar, so our support is something you need not question."
Loki did his little polite bow again. "I am deeply grateful to hear you say that, Lord Marvar," Loki said. The man nodded. "The lady will lead you to your table," Tony said, and gestured at the Ironet hostess waiting behind him. "Oh, this is going well," Tony said quietly when the Ice Elves were out of earshot. "Oh, you just had to say that," Loki said. "Relax," Tony told him, putting his arm around Loki's waist for a moment. "Here they come," Hatchet said. Only Frey and Gerd were left to arrive. The portal rippled and shifted, just as it always did when someone was coming through, but then it started pulsating a little differently. "Okay, wise." Hatchet and Loki already ran closer as the disk of light on the wall kept shifting and changing. The golden light radiating from the ruins darkened to glowing orange. Then they flared up with a sharp blue-violet color. The color slowly seeped into the portal. There was still some green and gold there, but now all three colors kept swirling and mixing together. "What is happening?" Tony asked. "Someone's taking over our portal!" Hatchet yelled back at him. Both he and Loki raised their hands, obviously trying to stop it, maybe. "I didn't know that could happen," Tony exclaimed. "I didn't either," Loki said, dropping his hands. "I can't even close it," he said angrily. "This is bad, isn't it? What do we do? Who is this?" Tony asked. "Someone powerful," Loki said. "Very powerful," Hatchet added. The two of them took a few steps back from the portal. "Stark, get out of here," Loki told him. "What? No," Tony argued right away. Loki turned to look at him, his eyes hard. You do not have your armor, so you will go, he told him sternly. Take them away from here. He nodded at the hostesses standing not that far away from him. I'm not going to leave you here, Tony argued, his voice turning too high, too strained. He was already clenching his hands so hard that he could feel his nails digging sharply into his palms. If you want to help, then get help, Loki told him. But you will not stay here. Don't make me teleport you away, Stark. Tony cursed. He kept staring into Loki's red eyes for another moment, but then turned around to hurry out. Come on, ladies, things might get nasty in here. Let's get out. The Ironettes did not question him at all. They were running immediately, high heels be damned. Tony looked back before he went too far. He saw that black lines started appearing on the wall around the portal, spreading like cracks in glass. Loki and Hatchet still stood there facing the portal. But Tony fought down the instinct that told him to run back to Loki and took off to get some help. His mind was screaming at him not to let Loki out of his sight, not now, not ever, but Loki was right. He would have been no use like this. So if Loki needed help, Tony was going to get him help. Well, at least he had a bunch of superheroes in the house.